welcome to this edition of EMS Now Up Close. I am Eric Miskell with EMS Now, and it's my pleasure today to speak with Don Charron. He is the chairman and CEO of Kimball Electronics. Everyone, of course, knows Kimball Electronics is one of the premier EMS companies on the planet. Don, of course, is exiting the company here at the end of the month after a very eventful and illustrious 24-year career with Kimball. So, Don, it's a pleasure to speak with you and have this opportunity to get some of your thoughts on the industry and the company that you've led.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, sir. Listen, I wanted to start with just talking, to me, it was interesting that Kimball, when you started with them in 1999, I believe, was a division of a furniture company, right? It was a Kimball International, which was and still is a commercial kind of a furnishings company. So that must have been kind of different. You hadn't obviously a history in the industry. Tell us kind of how what led up to that and what that was like in the early days.
Yeah, very interesting story. Not one you'd probably find very often in this industry or any industry, but you really have to go back to to when the company Kimball International acquired W. Kimball, a piano and organ company, back in the late 50s, and that really was the reason for developing electronics capability. Was for us to basically have that capability to serve our own needs, electronics needs in the organ at that time. And it's an interesting story that we stayed together so long as a division of Kimball International, but we were very much needed and strategically important to the organ business, which was a very successful business for the company for a decade and a half. The other part of that story that's really interesting is, you think about contract manufacturing, and I think over the years, you and I have had different discussions about this. And when did it ever start? Is there a mile marker out there somewhere where the EMS industry or contract manufacturing in general really became an industry that was worthy of its own naming? And for us as a company, we started really with sort of contract manufacturing in our DNA, if you will, with the TV cabinets that we made back in the day, early days for RCA and Zenith. So we had this sort of in our DNA, but we actually were working with General Electric back in the late 60s, making product for them on a contract manufacturing basis, even though we were a wholly held division of the parent company, and our main mission was making electronics that went into the musical organ. So it's kind of interesting how that all sort of evolved over the years, but that's a little bit more color on how the need for developing electronics capability came about.
Yeah. And to that point too, on your history, you also were in Mexico very early on, I think 50 years now or so.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. And that was born out of the need to have more workers because, making pianos, not so much maybe organs, but for sure making pianos, when you think about all the piano actions and all the things that have to get done to actually manufacture a piano, we identified the need for more workers to get involved with that. And yeah, we celebrated this year 50 years in Mexico. And we're in Reynosa, Mexico, which is right across the border from McAllen, Texas. And that area now is, if you haven't been there or seen it or heard of it, it's built out a very large base of companies in Reynosa, Mexico. And we have now, expanded a number of times over the years. And just this past year, I should say, we opened a second plant in Reynosa. We doubled the size of our capacity there. And so not only did we celebrate our 50th anniversary, in Reynosa, we cut the ribbon on a capacity expansion that doubled our footprint there.
Yeah, I saw that in the release when it came out.
Yeah.
So let's move forward a bit. You were obviously, instrumental in building what is today really one of the more admired EMS companies in terms of both its performance, the customer service, and the corporate culture that you have. And I want to touch on several of those issues. But looking back, what do you consider some of the more significant highlights of your career at Kimball Electronics?
Yeah, well, one of the big reasons I joined Kimball is I fell in love with the story and I fell in love with the company and the culture. And, we have what we call our guiding principles.
Mhm.
They basically have formed and shaped the values and the culture of the company over decades. Those guiding principles were left with us by our founders. And yeah, they're a little longer than a tweet, Eric. They're 468 words, but they're very meaningful. And our calling is to live those guiding principles every day. And I just thought that was awesome. And I thought, what a great foundation for a service company like contract manufacturing, like EMS. And
Mhm.
I really wanted to, when I arrived, to just double down on that and make sure that as we sort of, our vision always kept those guiding principles and our company culture, right at the heart of what we were doing. But when I arrived in 1999, the mission was pretty clear, really. We were behind the power curve. A lot of EMS companies were building out global footprints. And while we were one of the first to go to Mexico, as you pointed out, we were maybe one of the last to get to Asia with the Asian footprint and to get to Europe with the European footprint. And so it was very important that we catch up on that particular part of our strategy. That was a really big deal, and we made plans very quickly to expand, and we did into Thailand, into Poland, later
Mhm.
into China, into Romania, as we grew those businesses to what they are today. So that was a lot of work to build out that footprint, but do it in a way that was very people centric. So going to those foreign countries, we wanted to bring our guiding principles. We wanted to make sure they were perfectly translated, and that the Kimball family was just that. The Kimball family worldwide was the same in our being and what we were to customers.
Yeah.
And that was just a non-negotiable from us from day one, that we wanted to make sure that you know um, if customers were going to use us in multiple places within our footprint, they'd get the exact same Kimball
Mhm.
experience. And
Right.
so we worked very hard on that, and we continue to work hard on that over the past 20 plus years. The other thing we had to do pretty early on is decide what we're going to be when we grow up. I mean, at that time, going back to what I stated earlier about being a division that's mission was supporting electronics that went into the musical organ. You know, we had to react pretty quickly when that business tanked, and it tanked pretty quickly. I mean, I think if I recall well, maybe 5,000 dealers went out of business a year. And so, when piano and organs went away, they went away pretty quickly. And our capability at that time was pretty sizable. We didn't want to just shut it down. And so we thought, where can we go with this? And we already had an idea around contract manufacturing, and we partnered up with IBM, back in the early 80s during the PS2 launch, made, millions of keyboards for them. And they taught us a lot about how to be a partner in a B2B model, like contract manufacturing represents. And many ways we probably wouldn't have made it, to what we are today if we hadn't had that period of time, from our friends from IBM in Lexington, Kentucky, really getting us up to speed on what this should mean. But what we also recognize is that a lot of the partners that were serving the computer industry, the consumer electronics industry, what later became the communications industry, they were well ahead of us in establishing operations in Asia. We weren't there. We were losing business already at that time because we weren't in Asia, and we weren't sure that that was really suitable for our business model. The cycles were fairly short and quick. Contracts were fairly short, and yeah, there was a battle going on all the time just for survival. And we felt like we wanted to serve customers that maybe had more of a partnership in mind, more of a relationship in mind, and that the more it felt like it was transactional to us, the less interested we were. And so we decided that we were going to part ways with the whole computer industry. Again, consumer electronics was a part of what we had at that time, and communication devices we never really even got into. At that time, it's kind of strange to say it even today for me, we decided that we were going to focus more on automotive. We liked medical a lot for the same reasons. I'll talk about that. And then high-end industrial. Those are the three verticals we have today. And I can remember going to a board meeting probably 22 years ago and having like a PowerPoint slide or whatever slides we had back then. And, you know, it was a pie chart and it had all these end markets on it that the EMS industry was serving. And I had the, you know, the difficult task of saying, this is what we're going to focus on, that small little white slice that says other on it. And it wasn't really all that compelling, I don't think, at that time. Today, of course, it's all of those end markets are really interesting markets because of the growth and there's other sort of factors there that are very interesting. But so anyway, those two things were really important. How do we globalize the company quickly and get a globalized footprint in place? And then, you know, diversifying the company into the areas that we wanted to be in when we grew up.
Let me take a dive into a couple of those areas. First of all, and the other thing that we haven't mentioned is, of course, in 2014, you spun the company off from Kimball International to become your standalone independent company. So that obviously was a milestone in the development. And that was what, 8 years ago?
Yeah, just a little over 8 years ago. Yeah. You know, it was part of the sort of the vision all along that we could see that, you know, what's a furniture company doing in an electronics company, or what's an electronics company doing in a furniture company? What are we going to look like as we execute our strategies going forward? And I would say that at least the discussion of a potential spinoff, or, you know, because we knew we would never be valued in the market like we should be, having such diverse businesses. I will say the culture of the parent company, the culture of Kimball Electronics, we were all one, but there was no doubt we were serving very different businesses that had very different rhythms, very different needs. And so, you know, it wasn't as if we woke up one day and said, let's spin off the company. We had in our annual planning, strategic planning sessions, it was not if, it was when, and what are the things we want to get done to make sure both companies are successful, you know, when we would get there. And we had gotten close at different times. And I can remember even thinking we were getting close to sort of kicking off that effort right before the liquidity crisis back in 2008, 2009. We pulled it back in, focused on getting through that period, and really ultimately, you know, sort of set our course for the announcement in January of 2014 and the actual spin that occurred in November of 2014. So we was in the making for a long time before it actually happened. And yeah, the last 8+ years now have gone very fast as well. Hard to believe.
Yeah, no, I bet. Now, the other thing you touched on that I find kind of a core strength as I look at it for Kimball are the sectors you serve. As you say, you're not in the 3 Cs, and that, so it was intentional. I mean, the automotive, the medical, and what you call the industrial, and you have that the public safety kind of issue that is kind of an element of that.
Yeah.
And these all seem to be following kind of societal megatrends in some way, right? So speak to that and how this was truly a path that you were pursued purposefully.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it really started with automotive and some of the work we were doing at that time in the automotive space. It was before the sort of the electrification of vehicles took off, but you could see that technology was finding its way to the automobile, especially safety technology. And we were fortunate enough to early on, you know, develop a relationship with a company called Kelsey Hayes, which was later acquired by TRW, and TRW was later acquired by ZF. And as you can see, ZF is, you know, what, a 30+ billion euro company, and they're still our customer today through that whole chain. But going back to what we saw in automotive that we liked, we liked the fact that, you know, those partnerships needed to be formed very early on, and once they were formed, you know, they needed to be successful because, you know, there was just a really high cost of change. If you were wrong, to change to a different supplier was very difficult. And so we liked the fact that there was skin in the game on both sides. We liked the fact that a lot of the engineering work to make let's say an electronic control unit that would go on a vehicle, you know, there's a lot of engineering into getting to the point where the product was, you know, that it was durable, that it could operate in the toughest of environments. You know, whether it was temperature shock or vibration or water ingress, all these things were really important matters for an ECU that would go on to an automobile. And we like that engineering, and we kind of coined the phrase back then that, you know, let's focus on durable electronics, high reliability electronics. And so, you know, we collateralized that in our marketing materials. We went after customers that and decision makers where that was really relevant and important to them. And so we were able to grow our automotive business. But at the same time, you know, we could see that, you know, medical customers were interested in a lot of the same things, especially reliability, tight change control management, oversight of all changes, all of the sort of pre-work that goes on. The terminology is a little different, obviously, but it's all aimed at the same thing. It's validating parts and processes before you ever go into series production. We like that. And of course, high-end industrial, what really kind of played in our favor there is, you know, they maybe weren't as interested in sort of the really tight quality controls in the beginning, and even lean or Lean Six Sigma. But, you know, a lot of the automotive people migrated to industrial companies, and that really ended up being a really strong referral group for us, and got us in the doors to some really, really exciting customers in the high-end industrial space. And so, yeah, and at the same time, you know, you think about just how much conversion was going on, you know. So, you know, I talked about yesterday in our earnings call, you know, 70% of our automotive business is electronic power steering. And if you think about that journey, it was only maybe 10, 12 years ago when the majority of the cars built in the world were still being steered by hydraulic based power steering systems. That all converted from those hydraulic based systems over a decade plus to what is now an electronic power steering system, which is a controller controlling a motor. And so we just rode that wave, and we have, you know, 3 market leaders that are customers today. We make millions of controllers that end up on popular branded vehicles all over the world. And so, but it was just such a conversion of moving from where there was no electronics in power steering to where there's a lot of electronics in power steering. And so that's just an example of what was going on in the automotive space, continues to happen today. But also, you know, we do a lot of work in climate control, in the climate control area. Number of the customers that you probably know well in that space, the brand names that you would think of in heating and cooling units. You know, a lot of those units were being propelled by, you know, motors with no electronic controllers, just straight up PNC motors. Now today, those motors are still there, and a lot of the actuators are being propelled by those motors. But what's really happening is they're being controlled by an electronic controller, nearly all of them today, to make them more energy efficient and more applicable to some of the high-end applications that we have today. So there's a couple of examples. I could go through examples like that in the medical space, but you could just see more and more electronics going into these end market verticals. And we've really been the benefactor of that. Now, there was a day, Eric, I didn't know if, you know, if we could grow the company just on those 3 end market verticals at the rate we wanted to grow it. We're now approaching a $2 billion a year annual run rate, and we still see a lot of growth ahead of us just in those 3 market verticals.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. You know, I'm also thinking that over the course of 24 years, you saw a few issues within the industry, right? The EMS industry hasn't been smooth sailing for the past quarter decade.
Right.
And as you reflect on that, what were some of the more bigger challenges that you had to navigate and that you and Kimball had to navigate?
Yeah, really good question. Yeah, I think there were times when we were the darlings of Wall Street as an industry. I think there were times when we were destroying capital and we weren't anybody's darling. I think that, you know, one of the things when I look back and just think about the changes in the last 20 plus years, first of all, I think we've gotten to be a much more sophisticated business with tools that help us really understand our cost, understand what we have to do to be profitable, to be successful in this business, and to really be worthy of investment in terms of return on invested capital. And I think, you know, if there was a period of time in there, maybe a decade, when it was just about sales growth, just about capacity, I think many of us bought assets from customers divestitures of their manufacturing facilities. I don't know that that necessarily helped the industry as a total in terms of profitability, maybe short term, maybe not long term. I don't think we really dealt with managing capacity. And when we had too much capacity, we competed, and it ended up being a sort of a race to the bottom in that cycle. And I think we finally learned that that's really not the way this industry is going to attract investment, and it's really not any fun being in a race to the bottom. And so if you want to attract talent, you want to attract people who are going to make their careers in manufacturing, period, but especially in sort of more a B2B contract manufacturing model, we have to have a sustainable, profitable growth model, or it's just not going to work. And I think we as an industry in total got that. And you don't see too many players anymore that go into big red figures or reorganize every 2 or 3 years and write off mountains of goodwill. We really have become a much more prudent, much more disciplined industry as a total. And I think it's just made it better for all of us. We compete more, I think, on skill today. Look, it's competitive. It's still a lot of transparency in the industry. It's competitive, but I think we compete differently than we did back in those years when it felt more like a race to the bottom.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And one of the word that always comes to mind when I mention Kimball to people is culture, and you've talked about it. Everybody speaks to that, and you alluded to your guiding principles, as you called it, and I actually have them, so I'm going to read them. You said they're more than a tweet, but they are: our customers are business, our people are the company, the environment is our home, and profits are the ultimate measure.
Yeah, those are the headlines, and then there's the 468 words kind of get tucked under there. But you know what's interesting, and what caught my eye, all those years ago when I met the founders, when I met the families of the founders, and was making my decision, whether to join the company. And I was at Rockwell at the time, very large company, and it felt differently in that company in terms of how people were treated, how people felt they were treated, how they looked at their future, what they felt they were a part of, what their purpose was, what ultimately their legacy might be. All challenging things to feel in a large company like Rockwell. And when I came to Kimball, we were smaller and still a sizable company, $1 billion in annual sales overall, Kimball International. And I think maybe we had 4,000 employees, something of that nature. Again, furniture, electronics, all in. So it was a big enough company that you should think about culture, and you should think about how things are going to be if you double your size, etc. And especially if you're thinking about globalizing the company like we were. But the words underneath there, and what struck me is the people section, that whole part of that idea of the company is not this sort of architectural statement of a headquarters building or this beautiful brand or whatever. The company really is, it's the people. Our people are the company, and I like that. Because that really connected to me. Is if you're looking at the most valuable asset we all know we have is our people, and how do you really build a culture that everyone in the company knows that, and everyone wants to sort of build on that. And if you look at the guiding principles and the words underneath it, more than half of the words are under the people section of the guiding principles. Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting to me, that these founders felt that strongly that when they were putting pen to paper in terms of what they wanted to leave behind to the next generation, they put the most words in the people section, because they believe that if you get that right, you can do the rest, especially the part about the customers. In a service model, if you don't take care of the customer, you don't have much of a business going forward. And I also like the fact that they are already thinking about communities back then, how to give back to the communities you live and work in, which I think is awesome. The environment is our home. The words underneath there is all about what we would call today ESG, frankly. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly. A big section on that all those years ago. And then, the founders never got too far from, at the very bottom of the guiding principles, where it talks about profits are the ultimate measure, of how well you're running the company. It just is. It's not a statement of greed. It's a statement of efficiency, and absolutely not a statement of greed. It's, if you're not profitable, it's the really only source of job security. And we always talked about having economic freedom to execute our strategies and do what we want to do. And I just admired the way they structured the guiding principles and their whole approach. And it really ended up, to me anyway, building, forming and shaping a culture that's very people centric. And in a service industry, I know we bring a lot of tech. We're, I used to say we're blue collar tech. I've actually, EMS is blue collar tech. I've actually dropped the blue collar now. Manufacturing is technology, but we're a service industry, and to deliver service day in and day out, especially during the pandemic, the supply chain disruptions, the material shortages, the people you have on the front line that are working through all these issues with the customers are so valuable. That culture of getting the job done, going the extra mile, making sure the customer knows you're on it, that's huge. And I think that's been a big part of our success over the years, is we have just such a strong company culture, and we've maintained it as we've grown and globalized the company.
Yeah. Listen, I want to be respectful of your time, so let me squeeze in a couple of quick final questions here.
Sure.
I noticed that your annual report was titled Poised for Growth. So you just announced some record earnings yesterday, quarterly earnings yesterday. Congratulations on that. So you're clearly positive for the industry moving forward. What's your view of the EMS as it proceeds over the next years and decade?
Yeah, I said this in our annual shareholder meeting in November. I said it again yesterday in the earnings call. My 24 years, I've never been more excited about the future for Kimball Electronics. We've been very fortunate in terms of winning new programs in these three verticals that are going to continue to propel the company forward into the future. I'm also excited about the industry overall. And again, I just come back to what I said earlier. I really think we've become a much more disciplined industry overall, and that we have sustainable, profitable growth models in place now. And I think, when you look at the winner's circle in the future, and not only for the EMS industry, and I think also for companies within that industry, I think the winner's circle will have within it companies that invested in their people, companies that invested in technology and automation, through this period, starting, you could say, even 5 to 10 years ago, and just kept on going with it. Because I really think, we're facing a worldwide people shortage, worker shortage, that is going to be impactful and has already been impactful. Again, I think the winner's circle in the future for the EMS industry, if we don't do a good job, people are insource, because they won't be able to manage that risk, because people are leaving, or turnover is too high, or we can't hire the people we need to complete the mission. So I think it's going to be very important for the industry to show that we can be employers of choice. We can attract people, we can attract talent, and we can get the job done for our customers. And I think if you look at the EMS companies in that circle, within that industry, the winner circle will be the companies that do that the best. Yeah, and that's something I talk often about to our teams here inside of Kimball. How are we making sure we're a great place to work? How are we attracting talent? How are we retaining talent? And that's everybody's job. I mean, it starts with me at the top. The tone's got to be right, coming from me, but it's got to get all the way down to every employee in the company. And I think that's really important. Yeah. I'm bullish on both the industry, and obviously, I'm bullish on our company.
Yeah. So what does the future hold for you then, Don? You're after 24, a very successful career. You're still a young man. What is the next chapter of your life hold?
Well, thank you for asking that question. When I turned 50, I put together a personal plan that included all aspects of my life. What am I going to do from 50 to 60, and what am I going to do at 60? So first of all, that 10 years, that time frame, as you know, I don't know, I think it was the same for you. It goes by so fast.
Yes.
Yeah, it goes by so fast. But I'm grateful that I took, in fact, that was some advice from a very good friend of mine, and I took it, and I'm glad I did that. So I'm, at obviously the tail end of that 50 to 60 plan. And then what after 60? I've been in executive management for so long, and I've hardly had a minute to spare for anything really outside of the work I was doing. If I had time to carve away, it was time with my family. I have 3 children. They're all grown now. but I shape up my 60, what's after 60. I want to give back more with my time. My wife and I have been fortunate. We've been married 35 years this year. We've been fortunate enough to be able to support various different charities, with monetary contributions, but not so much of our time because of the fact that, it's just, I just was too busy with important things. Not, obviously growing this company and doing what we've done to build out our strategy. It takes a lot of time and commitment. So channeling more of my life into those areas is where I want to go next. I know this sounds crazy that I'd actually would want to travel after all my business travel over all these years. I think 75 days or 100 days a year for I don't know how many years, except for the COVID period. But I actually I would like to travel with my wife and go more on vacation style trips than business trips. So we're going to do that and just enjoy a little bit of a slower pace than what it's been in the last few decades.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That sounds like a good plan. Good for you. So
Thank you.
listen, Don, again, I want to be respectful of your time. So let me just close by saying, listen, I want to thank you for your contributions to the EMS industry. It's been significant, and you've set a good example for many people with the industry. So thank you for that. And, I just wish you kind of good health, happiness, and success in this next chapter of your life. And thank you very much for taking time with us today.
Thank you, Eric. All the best to you too.
Thank you, sir. To you too. Cheers.
Cheers.